Today we're going to start on Mem Dalet Amud Beis. It is a little bit under halfway down, and it's Tanya Rebbe Lazar Eimer Mishum Rebbe Yossi. Like 20-something lines up. Okay. I think Hashem that you're learning Torah every day. So we're learning Hashem the base of Migdash immediately. And we're learning for Shlema also. Father, Naftali, Ben Mechbela, and Yaakov ben Fega.
And Elio ben Menachem Mendel.
And your father as well. Okay.
My father's already out of the hospital.
Good news, Yeshakayach. Tanya, starting the Brisa, Rebbe Lazar, Eimer, Mishum, Rebbe Yossi, Haglili. Some have Rebbe Yossi, some have the Glili taken out of the text. Okay. Rebbe Lazar, Eimer, Mishum, Rebbe Yossi. It's interesting because Rebbe Lazar and Rebbe Yossi would be friends. Because it's a Brisa. But Rebbe Yossi Haglili would be a little bit older, because he was more of a, basically was a Talmud Chaver of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Yossi was just a student of Rabbi Akiva. Anyway, it says like this: Pigel b'davar nasa b'chutz, pigel b'davar nasa b'fnim, like pigel. What we're learning is like this: the service that the pigel is taking place, in other words, the thoughts that the kayin is having that are making it pigel, is while he's doing a service outside the sanctuary, in the temple courtyard. And the same is what he's thinking about.
56.
We're on 40, 44. Oh, volume 56. And also what he's thinking about, what he's going to do after the allotted time, which of course that's pigel, I mean something out of the allotted time, is also something that's going to be done in the temple courtyard. Not something that's going to be done inside. Something that was done inside, like pigel, it's not going to be pigel. And he says, Ketzad, give you an example. How is this? Now, we're talking about the sacrifices, the paramanasrafim, the sacrifices that the blood is taken into the sanctuary and put on the inner altar. And so it goes like this. He's standing outside in the courtyard. V'amar says, Harini sheichet, behold, I'm about to shech, and with the intention of lahazis midam alamachar, to sprinkle the blood tomorrow. So he's doing the avodah outside. Okay, that could make pigel, but he's thinking about sprinkling the blood, which is supposed to go inside the sanctuary, which we say is not. It does not make pigel. We say late pigel, that doesn't make pigel. It's considered achilas pnim. Because thinking about something during an outside service about what's supposed to be done inside doesn't make pigel. Let's say he's in the sanctuary. While he's doing the service inside the sanctuary, he's thinking about how he's going to burn the limbs, the organs, outside on the outer altar, and to pour the remaining of the blood on the outside altar. So also that, out of the allotted time, right? Then that's late pigel as well. Why? Because the service that he was doing was being done inside. Even though he was thinking about something outside, but you need to have both those criteria, the service and what he's thinking about doing. But let's say he's standing outside in the courtyard, and he says, I'm slaughtering this animal with the intention of pouring the remnants of the blood tomorrow, or to offer up the limbs tomorrow. Both the service and what he's thinking about doing out of the allotted time is all in the outside of the sanctuary. It's all in the courtyard. That's pigel. Because he's thinking about something to do outside during a service that's being done outside. we're holding now by Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. You see that over there, right on this column? Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Mikra, what's the source for this that you're telling me? It says Kasher Yuram Yishar Zebach Hashlamim. Now, this is talking about the Parkain Mashiach. It's talking about if the Kohen Gadol does a sin. So it says you do to this bull what you would do to a shlamim. What's, in other words, the same organs that are put on the altar is what's done to this. The same organs that are put on the altar by a shlamim is what's done to the Parkain Mashiach as well. And it lists through all the items. We have a comparison. We're comparing the Parkan Mashiach to a regular shlamim. Now, the truth is that it happens to say in that section all the items that you need to put on the altar. So it's not. We had at one point we said, well, by the Par Halam Davar, it didn't say. It didn't say which items were put on the altar. So we had to learn it from the Parkan and Mashiach, or whatever we learned, one from the other. But over here, by the Parkan and Mashiach, it does say it. So what is this comparison? Why does it have to say just like the Shlamim? So it says, well, it's actually coming to teach me the halachas of Pigel. Masher Zebach HaShlamim, just like by the Shlamim, which that's where the source of the loss of Pigel. The action, in other words, the service and the thoughts have to be something that's on the outer altar. Also, by a Parkan Mashiach, which some of the things are done inside, but the Pigel is only going to be if it's associated with the things that are outside in the temple courtyard. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rav Bavu, Amar Rav, Halacha Rabbi Lazar, Shamim Mishum Rabbi Yossi. The halacha is like Rabbi Lazar that says in the name of Rabbi Yossi. He paskins what the halacha is. Yeah? What is he paskening? What is his ruling? He's issuing a ruling that Pigel only takes place with things that are in the outer, in the courtyard, not in the sanctuary. Amar Rava, and actually it's adjusted here by the commentaries, including the Shita Mekabetzis. It's supposed to be Amar Rabbi Yosef. It says Hilchasa l'Mashiach. What are you doing, Rab Nachman? You're telling me the halacha for when Mashiach comes, what we're going to need to know when Mashiach comes. Hilchasa l'Mashiach. There's a famous Gemara. Amalei Abaya, as Abaya says back, Elamiyata kol shchitas kodshim listening. Hilchasa l'Mashiach. If you're concerned about that, it's not relevant right now. So then why are we learning Maseches Zavachim? Shchitas kodshim is Maseches Zavachim. We shouldn't learn it. It's only for Mashiach comes. Just for Kabbalah Schar, we learn it because it's part of the Torah, and you get a reward for studying Torah. So Achanami, just for Kabbalah Schar. So what's the problem if he says Hilchasa? It says Hachi Kamin Alach. Rabbi Yosef responds, no, but I'm telling you is Hilchasa Lamali. I understand you can learn it, but when it comes to issuing a ruling, that's a different story. Mashiach comes, we'll figure out what's the Mashiach will tell us. And Lishnachrina. Another version of this. I'm like halacha kamin. I'm talking about the halacha aspect. Yeah.
Supposed to be ready for Mashiach. Supposed to prepare.
So how would you like to interpret this? Why was he saying that we don't have to be ready? What's your?
We have the laws in place, then. I saw a whole beautiful interpretation by Rabbi Gerlitsky from Malay. He wrote 3 volumes called Yimaisa Mashiach Ba'alacha. Very big populim and everything. But one of his first essays that he does is on this Gemara, and he explains that it's specifically Rabbi Yosef that issues this ruling, because Rabbi Yosef was blind, and he has a whole thing based on if you say that the halachas that a blind person is obligated or not obligated. Somehow he worked out a whole thing that it's only Rabbi Yossi that holds that we shouldn't be paskening halachas, but everyone else doesn't hold like that. Whenever you have this Gemara, which we do have it in other places, Hilchas Mashiach, why are you telling me the halachas? It's always Rabbi Yosef that says it, except in our Gemara where it says Rava, but the commentary is adjusted. Okay. If you're interested, just text me. I have it at home. It's in Hebrew, but it's
quite a few pages. Okay, I have a new Mishnah. Kadshay Oivdei Kechavim Ein Chayavim Ale. It's a new Mishnah. Ein Chayavim Le Mishum Pigel Neiser V'Tami. V'Sheichta Mechutz is Pater. A non-Jew is allowed to bring a sacrifice. He can bring a sacrifice to the temple. However, not all the laws are exactly the same. So he brings a sacrifice. Yeah, he brings a sacrifice. However, if the sacrifice is brought, the Kayan has thoughts of pigel, or if it's actually left over, and left over a lot of time, and it becomes nicer, or tamei, bless you, or someone tamei eats it, and which normally that would be a big punishment, or someone slaughters the sacrifice outside the temple. In all of these cases, he's going to be pater. Normally, it would be chayev. If it would be a Jewish sacrifice, a Jewish person sacrifice, then it would be chayev. This is what Reb Shimon says. And Rabbi Yossi mechayev. Rabbi Yossi says no, he's going to be chayev. So in other words, we have some leniencies here by a non-Jew's korban. Tana Rabbanan, starting in a brisa. When it comes to the sacrifices of a non-Jew, loy nanin, you're not allowed to have personal benefit from a sacrifice. So you can't have personal benefit from the non-Jew sacrifice either. But the problem is that there's no me'ilah. Me'ilah is the biblical prohibition of having personal benefit from something that's consecrated. By a non-Jew sacrifice, you don't have the biblical prohibition, you just have the rabbinic prohibition of leinanin. And like we learned in the Mishnah, the Bryce is elaborating, you also don't have the rules of pigol, nicer, and tamei. Pigol is the thoughts, nicer is when it's actually left over, and tamei is when someone's tummy eats it. Very nice in Tmura. And if someone decides that this sacrifice is going to be exchanged for another one, he's going to bring a different sacrifice in its place. So the second one becomes consecrated. It says, yeah, not by a non-Jew sacrifice. Vein may be in the Sachim, and you don't bring libations. Now, it's going to say, Aval Karban Tarnasachim. So what? If you do bring a sacrifice, that sacrifice does need libations. So what does it mean you don't need libations? That's the non-Jew can't offer the libations independently of the sacrifice. But if he does bring a sacrifice, the sacrifice needs libation. If he sent them along, then great. Or he sent money along, then great. Otherwise, the temple will fill in and will give the libations to go along with the sacrifice.
So can a Jew offer libations independent?
Yeah, a Jew can, a non-Jew can't. That's what this Bryce is telling me.
Libations is
It's the oil and the
part of Ne'ilah, because that's one of the prayers on Yom Kippur,
no,
right?
not we're talking about the word me'ilah. Yeah.
Okay.
Me'ilah.
So what is accomplished?
What's accomplished?
Is it just an adava?
Yeah, it's just an adava. Yeah, it's like I'll give a kiddush.
Okay.
Divrei Reb Shimon. There's different versions of this Gemara. Number Rabbi Yossi Raini b'kulan lahachmish number b'lashem. Yossi says that I see in all of them. Do you have the Rabbi Yossi there? They take out Rabbi Yossi. They take out Reb Shimon. What do they do in your Gemara?
Rabbi Yossi.
And Rabbi Yossi have everything. These are the words of Reb Shimon. Okay. Let me just see. Okay, fine. Everything looks like my Gemara as well. We'll see later. It's going to be some confusion about this. Rabbi Yossi says, I'm actually strict about all of this. You're telling me that the non-Jewish sacrifice is different. I say it's the same. Shenemar b'hen la'Hashem, it says that it's a sacrifice to Hashem. And when it says ish, and about bringing the sacrifices, it's coming to include that the non-Jews can also offer their sacrifice. They can also offer a sacrifice. They can give a donation sacrifice, just like a Jew. When do we say, now going back to the Tanakama, when does the Tanakama make a distinction? Rabbi Yossi doesn't make a distinction. But when does the Tanakama make a distinction? That's only because Mizbeach. That's only when it comes to sacrifices that are put on the altar. But when it comes to something that he was giving to the temple fund, not to the altar, but to the temple fund, then there's going to be regular me'ilah. That's going to be already something that belongs to the temple, and you can't have personal use from it, even on a biblical level. Okay, now with the Gemara, what it does to a Mishnah, it also does to a Brisa. It goes back to explain what the Brisa means. It elaborates on it. When it says that you can't have personal benefit from a non-Jew sacrifice, that's midrabanan. That's only on a rabbinic level. But there's no me'ilah. That's on a biblical level. You don't have the prohibition of personal benefit. The Gamar me'ilah chet michuma. And what's going on here is that by the pasuk of me'ilah, it says v'chata b'shgaga. He will sin unintentionally. By chuma, it says, and he shouldn't carry on, and he shouldn't contaminate and have the sin. And then, so it says the word chet by chuma, it says the word chet by me'ilah. So I'm learning that there's going to be a law that's similar to chuma over to me'ilah. But I'm not done yet. But chuma ksiv b'nei Yisrael. By chuma, it says the le'yechalu eskachi b'nei Yisrael. You should not profane the holies of the Jewish people. Which means that if we take what it says by truma about that it's the Jews' truma, and then we compare that over to me'ilah through the word chet, we're going to end up with that the me'ilah only applies to the Jew, to what the Jew consecrates. And it also, we're not going to be chayiv for the non-Jew sacrifice for the laws of pigel, Naisar, and Tami. Pigel is the thoughts out of the allotted time. Naisar is it's actually out of the allotted time, and Tami is if someone Tami eats it. My time. What's the reason? Why you have these exemptions by the non-Jew sacrifice? So it says, the Asi Pigel Avain Vain Mi Naisar. We're going to do that pigel, we're going to learn with a similar word from Naisar. The word by Naisar is Avain, and the word by pigel is avain. Avain means sin or transgression. Basi naisar chilul chil mitzuma. And then we're going to look at another word by naisar, which says the word chilul, which means to profane. And we're going to take, and it says by tuma, by tuma, it says also the word profane, chilul. And then by tuma it says b'nazru b'kachi b'nei Yisrael. You should separate from the holies. Someone that's tummy should separate from the holies of the Jewish people. So by Tumah, it's only by the holies of the Jewish people. That takes us over to Naisar, which tells us that it's only by the Jewish people. That takes us over to Pigel, which tells us using the different verbal analogies. Gezeira Shav, it's called. Beinais and Tmura. It also doesn't make an exchange. In other words, if you try to exchange the non-Jew sacrifice with another sacrifice, the other animal won't become consecrated. My timer. Discus tmura lemaiser behema, because we have a comparison, tmura, exchanging one animal for a sacrifice, to the comparison to the animal tithing. Maiser behema is discus lemaiser dagan, and then the maiser behema, the animal tithe, is compared to the tithing of the grain. It says, how do we have that? Because it says aser to aser, you should take a tithe, and the Gemara talks about that there's two tithes that you should have to take. One is the animal tithe, and the other one is the grain tithe. But Ma'aser Dagan, and now we go by the grain. Well, guess what it says? Ksiv b'nei Yisrael. It says the Jewish people. It says the Jewish people. So now we're going to take us back to Ma'aser Behema. It's going to be the Jewish people. And it's going to take us back to Tmura, which means only a Jewish person's sacrifice. Gemara has a question. You only learned it from Meiser by the grain over to the Meiser of the animal, and then from the Meiser of the animal you're learning it over to Tmura. So it's something that you learned behekesh, and you're using what you learned to go into it's secondhand. We got it. Do we do that? So the Gemara says it's not a problem because we do that. We do relearn something behekesh, but not by kachim. We only do it by chulin, by regular mundane things. And Meiser Dagan is not holy. Meiser Dagan is just what's given to the Levi, the tithe that's given to Levi, but it's not holy. So the Gemara says Meiser Dagan chulin, it's considered chulin We know in the whole Torah you're allowed to learn one thing that's learned. You could do to another thing. It's only by kachim where we don't do that. That's what the Gemara had previously.
Why isn't it holy? Can you take it and use
Yeah.
it for something else?
Yeah, it's actually the meiser is different than truma. Truma is only allowed to be eaten by the kohen. Meiser could be eaten by anyone. It belongs to the Levi, but he can invite you over and say, "Hey, I got some meiser. Let's go. Let's have a party." But by truma, he can't invite you over. He's can only have his kohenim friends and family.
You can eat it anywhere.
The meiser you can eat anywhere, and the truma you can eat anywhere. But the truma is holy. You have to be, everyone that's going to eat it had to have gone to the mikveh. And Maisa, they don't have to go to the mikveh. Maisa is just regular, yeah. Maisa Sheni has some restrictions. That's a different story. Maisa Sheni has to be taken to Yerushalayim. That has restrictions. Also can't be tamei. But that could be redeemed. Maisa Sheni could be redeemed, so there's a leniency there. Truma can't be redeemed. It says, we're learning from Meiser of grain. So we say that it's not a problem because Meiser of grain is chulin. It's mundane grain. It's not holy. So therefore, we can do a hekesh from Meiser of grain. The Gemara says, but 1 second, I'm learning from a chulin, but I'm ultimately, that halacha is coming over to kachim. So which one do I look at here? I have two sides to this. On one hand, where I'm learning from, I could use a double hekesh from one to another. Where I'm learning to, I cannot use a double hekesh. So which one's the main thing? Do I look at this part, at the beginning part, or do I look at the recipient, where the halacha is received? So it says, if you look at where it's coming from, if you look at the teacher, so then that's good, because the teacher is chulin, and the teacher can, what it's teaching from is acceptable to learn one from another. But according to the opinion that says you don't look at the teacher, you look at the recipient, it's coming over to kachim, and it's coming to tell me that it doesn't make a tmura, which is kachim. It's talking about a sacrifice. The Gemara says, I don't need to learn from chulin. I can learn directly from Meiser Behema over to Tmura. And it goes like this, that a non-Jew is allowed to bring a sacrifice that's a donation. He's not allowed to bring a sacrifice that's an obligation. We don't accept obligations from him. And even if it's an obligation that doesn't have a set time, they don't have obligations. But if he's going to decide to take Meiser and make Meiser, there's nothing. That's not a... So he only has donation offerings. So because of that, he only has donation offerings. So we learn from Meiser, Behema, over to Tmura, that's only one step, that it only applies to a Jew, not to a non-Jew.
So where is a non-Jew supposed to give Meiser?
A non-Jew doesn't have the rules of Meiser Behema, of the 10th animal going to the temple. Doesn't have to do that. Yeah, but it doesn't say that a non-Jew has to tithe.
I don't know where they're
supposed to
if
give
they
it
want
if
to
they want
tithe,
to.
where do they do? Where they came from?
The tithe for grain, go to the Levi. Just talking about the tithe that's going to the temple as a sacrifice animal. Otherwise, it would go just to a Levi or to the poor. They're into tithing here. The non-Jews, they do tithing.
Yeah.
Religious, right? The religious non-Jews.
Yes.
Yeah.
Tell them to write a check to Beis Menachem.
Not so simple. Actually, it's not so simple. I heard some shluchim talking that the Rebbe was at the end of like the last Mivtzayim, when the Rebbe was encouraging these things that didn't get taken on. So, but one of the things was the 7 Noahide laws. That it was at the end that the Rebbe started to promote it. So people said, yeah, we should have taken it on, and this, because that's where the money is. By the okay. It's complicated. It's complicated, the 7 Achelos, because they don't have a community. So you tell them to do it to 7 Achelos, but there's no community that they're supposed to join. And until you get a community started, you have to have spoken to 10 people already. And each one is dependent on the other. So they just do it independently, and nothing sticks. Yeah. They would say prayers, and they would, you have to figure it out. But just to convince one guy to do it, it's like, how long is that going to last? Okay. Tanu ein mivim nesachim. We were saying here that the non-Jew doesn't bring libations independent from the sacrifice. He brings with the sacrifice, but not independently. Tanu Rabbanan. So in the Brisa, it says Ezra. Regarding the nesachim, that's right after the spies. They returned and they said that you're going to be in the desert for 40 years. The Torah says, but don't worry, because when you get to Israel, you're going to have other halachas. You're going to have the halachas of the nesachim. When you bring a sacrifice, you're going to have to bring the libations along. It was like a consolation to them that, one day we're going to get to Israel. Anyway, in that section, it says, Kol Ezrach Yasakacha. Anyone that's a settler should do this. No, the settler means any Jew should do such. Ezrach Mevin Nesachim, Ein Evin Mevin Nesachim. Only one of the Jewish settlers is going to do, as a citizen. Ezrach is a citizen. A citizen is going to do it, but not a non-Jew. Maybe if he brings a sacrifice, it doesn't require the libations. It says Talmud Merkacha. No, it says that it has to be. Which means that together with the sacrifice, but independently, no. And if he doesn't bring it, then the community brings it. It's okay. Rabbi Yossi says that I would be strict on all of these. And then the Gemara goes on to explain the first opinion. That first opinion is Reb Shimon. When do we say that there was a difference between if it's a Jew's offering or not? That's only when it's talking about an offering, talking about something that's going a sacrifice. But something that would just go to the temple funds, it's called Bedek Habayis, that there would be Me'ilah. My timer. What's the reason for this distinction between the two types of consecrations? So Kosovar, Reb Shimon holds, these are Tanakama, Ki Gamra Me'ilah, Chet Mitshuma, Dumya Deshuma, the Kedush Zaguf. When do we learn that there's a limitation? When do we say that there's a distinction between what a Jew offers and what a non-Jew offers? That distinction regarding Me'ilah, that's what we learned from Truma. So it needs to be similar to Truma. Truma is the 2% that's given to the Kohen. The Kedusha Saguf, it itself becomes intrinsically holy, right? So Avol Kedusha's Bedek Habayis, when you consecrate something to the temple, the Kedushas Damim, Lai. But you don't have that distinction between a Jew and a non-Jew when it's only a temple consecration, only to the temple fund. Tanu Rabbanan. Taught in a brisa. Dam shenitma v'zarku b'shagig hoitza. We have a rule that if something was done with an impurity unintentionally, like the blood became impure and was sprinkled, so we say that it still atones for the person. The sacrifice is still acceptable. And the way that the mechanism for how this works is because the Kohen Gadol wears a tzitz, the plate that goes on his forehead, and that tzitz is an atonement for any unintentional impurity. So if there's an atonement already in place that's set up, then the sacrifice is still acceptable because of the tzitz effects that it like clears away that unintentional impurity.
Like a mater.
The mater is a little bit different, but it's a yes. No, I would say the opposite. The tzitz is an appeasement for any sin. It's like an atonement for any sins of impurity that are unintentional.
Is it considered Kabbalah?
Um,
Kabbalah sacrifice?
yeah,
That's from
it's
a
considered accepted.
non-Jew?
Now, so here we didn't mention the non-Jew yet. We're just talking right now that if the blood was sprinkled and actually the blood became impure, liquids could become impure. If the blood becomes impure and it was sprinkled, the sacrifice is still good. Okay, that's what was done unintentional. The mazid, if this was done intentionally, then loy hortzer, then it's a rabbinic decree that it should not be an appeasement. Now, Rashi points out that it doesn't mean that he needs to bring a separate sacrifice. The sacrifice was acceptable. The only thing is you can't eat the meat. That's what it means. But the owner's atonement was accomplished. He quotes another Gemara where it says that clearly. We didn't say anything about a Jew and non-Jew yet. We didn't say anything. We're just talking about the blood became impure. Aval b'tzibur. When do we make this distinction between shoygig and mazid? The animal is going to be allowed to be eaten. That's only by an individual. But when it comes to the community sacrifice, whether it was done unintentionally or it was done intentionally, it's always appeased. Why? Because when it comes to impurity, the community, if everyone is tamei, we find times where the sacrifice is brought even knowingly with impurity, if the congregation is impure. Like the Korban Pesach, if everyone's impure, they bring the sacrifice anyway. It's only when individuals aren't where they have to do the Pesach Sheni. Okay, so we're more lenient with impurity when it comes to the community.
They're made impure because of a non-Jew is part of the community.
No, the non-Jews don't give off impurity biblically. Right? It would only be a corpse, a Jewish corpse or something like that, or maybe a sheretz or something. Okay, well, when it comes to a non-Jew, if the blood became impure, whether it was intentional or unintentional, it's not an appeasement. They would bring their sacrifice again. Okay, the Gemara says, come on. I'm sorry, Amru Rabban Kamei Rav Papa. The sages said in front of Rav Papa, come on, who would this go like? The like Rabbi Yossi, it can't fit with Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi was the one that did the full comparison between a non-Jew sacrifice and a Jewish sacrifice. He says it's the same thing. He says, right? Rabbi Yossi says, I'm going to be strict about all of them. I think all the non-Jewish sacrifice is the same as the Jewish sacrifice. So according to Rabbi Yossi, it should be the same. So they said this Tanu Rabbanan, this Brisa doesn't fit with Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi would say that they're all the same. Gemara says, Amar of Papa, Rabbi Yossi would say that they're all the same. I'm strict by a non-Jew sacrifice with the same laws that applies to a Jew. Amalu Rav Papa says to the students, he says, I feel the Rabbi Yossi. No, it could actually be Rabbi Yossi. Shani Halsim Damakra Lahem. The pasuk says, what's the pasuk referring to? It should be an appeasement for them. Talking about the tzitz. And who's the them? Lahem, the Jews, not for the non-Jews. The tzitz only works to appease Hashem for a sacrifice that was brought with impurity. If it was a Jewish sacrifice, not for the non-Jewish sacrifice. Amalei Rav Huna, Breder of Nasan. Breder of Nasan. It's Rav Huna, Breder of Yeshua. That's a friend of Rav Papa. Okay, anyway, we have Rav Huna, Breder of Nasan, Rav Papa, Alameata, Asher Makdishim. So it says also that they consecrate. Do you want to say that it's referring to what they consecrate is only the tumah, that when it comes to impurity, it only refers to a Jewish carbon and not to a non-Jewish carbon? Yes, what's going to come out like this is that a non-Jewish sacrifice has no loss of impurity. We're looking at the word. It says l'ratzin lehem as an appeasement for them, and the non-Jew doesn't have the concept of appeasement to Hashem. Hashem chose the Jewish people, so to be an appeasement to Hashem would only be from the Jewish people. So therefore, it's not going to work if a non-Jew sacrifice is going to be impure. It's not going to be an appeasement for them. A new Mishnah now. Dvarim shein chayavim l'mishum pigel, chayavim l'mishum noiser, mishum tamei chutz min adam. We learned at the beginning of the chapter, beginning of this parak, that there were certain things Pigel doesn't apply. And that's because there was no other matir. There was nothing that allowed them to be now permitted to the altar, permitted to be eaten. For example, the kaimetz, or the ketires, or the incense, or the kayanim's mincha, the blood that's applied to the altar doesn't have another matir. It itself is the matir, which means that Pigel doesn't apply to them. Someone would eat any of these things. Well, our Mishnah says, Pigel, those things that Pigel doesn't apply to, that whole list that you had in the previous Mishnayos, then, however, you're still chayev if you eat them if they're left over too long, past the expiration date, which is usually only 1 day, and or if the person's tummy is going to be chayev. So, in other words, even though there's no Pigel, but you still have the other laws. Chutz min adam, except for the blood. Because we're going to see that the blood is an exception. It's not going to be chayev for that. Reb Shimon mechayev b'davar shedarken lechel. Reb Shimon says that no, you'll be chayev for anything that's edible. Actually, we have an interesting version of the text. It says Numi Reb Shimon. My Gemara doesn't have it, but Rashi quotes it and the Shittim Kmetzes quotes it. Instead of Amar Reb Shimon, it says Numi Reb Shimon. You see that? Numi means.
What does that mean?
I think it means just to say, but it's just like a strange word. Rashi quotes Reb Meshulam bar Kleinamas Gain on the time of his death. He interpreted Numi Reb Shimon is like Amar Reb Shimon. Anyway, okay. I don't know the significance of that. It says Reb Shimon says Chayev. The davar shedarken lechel. You have a note over there? Which number? According to Rashi, the text of the Mishnah should read Numi Reb Shimon. Said Reb Shimon. Rashi states that earlier version of the text said Chutz min adam v'numi, which is indecipherable. However, Meshulam bar Kleinus amended it at the time of his death to read Numei. Explaining that Reb Shimon, Numei Reb Shimon means said Reb Shimon. Taisvus in Menachos states that he made this in two other textual emendations at the time of his death, as if through prophecy. Menachos 109b.
Makes it stronger than a one.
Huh?
It's a stronger way of saying what Mark said.
Maybe.
But also something like he said to me, like maybe personally, or
This is an unbelievable Taisvus. I don't know if you have a traditional Gemara that has Menachos in it. You turn to the last page. It says, Reb Kleinimus, the father of Reb Meshulam, he amended it like the second version at the time of his passing. However, the Sefer, the scribe, made a mistake. Bein Allah la'oila. It says that there were three things that he amended. K'mipi nevuah b'shas p'tirasei, as if it was from prophecy at the time of his death. Goes to the Numi Reb Shimon Mechayev.
You're saying deathbed is considered pretty strong, I guess.
Yeah, it's got to be in those books. This book's a prophetic inspiration after the prophets. You know, like Heschel was into that. Anyway. Okay. So what does Reb Shimon say? He says that only items that b'davar shedark lechel, only items that are edible are going to have the rules of nicer and tamei. However, the rule, the other things that are not edible, for example, the wood or the frankincense or the incense, that's not edible. So over there, the laws of tumah don't apply to that. Okay. Tana Rabbanon, starting in the Brisa, maybe I would say that the laws of tumah will apply to only things that pigul applies to, which is things that have another mater. Well, a mater, that means something that's that allows everything else to be eaten. Like if the blood is sprinkled, or maybe the kaimetz allows everything else to be eaten. But not for things that don't have a separate mater. And so maybe the laws of tumah only apply to those things as well, just like the laws of pigul. Bidinu. And I'll give you a logical explanation. There's a ma pigul when it comes to the laws of pigul, shu b'kviya u'b'diachas. Someone eats pigul b'shaygig. If he eats it b'mezid, then it's kares. But if he eats pigul b'shaygig, he has to bring a carbon chatas. What type of chatas? A chatas kavua. And b'diachas. He only has to know about it afterwards. We'll see in contrast to what means. Why is it unintentional? Because he didn't know about it at all before. You'll see in a moment what this is in contrast to. He didn't know about it before. Just afterwards, someone says, "Oy, I forgot to tell you that was pigul." And if an entire congregation is involved in this, it doesn't become permitted, just like impurity would become permitted. If there's no exceptions. And nevertheless, when it comes to pigul, he only chayav for pigul for things that have another mater that allow it to be eaten for human consumption or for the altar to consume by the altar. Let's compare that to tumah. When it comes to tumah, shuba'ila v'yared, which does not have a set sacrifice. It's a sacrifice that depends on the person's income. If they're wealthy, then they use the animal. If not, then they bring the flour offering. And when it comes to impurity, you need to have two awarenesses. Once before, he has to know that he was tamei. Then he has to forget about it. Remember in Maseches Gemara Shavuos. Then he has to forget about it. And then he has to remember again after he already did it. So there's a yediyah betchila and yediyah b'saif. And there's a helem b'intayim. And you need to have the forgetting in the middle. Okay. In tumah is even more lenient because when the entire congregation is impure, you can still bring the sacrifice in, etc. For sure, whatever restrictions are on the pigul, whatever limitations are on the pigul, for sure should be on the tumah. The tumah has much more restrictions than the pigul. So Talmud Laim Hashem Makdishim Lei. It says no. It says what they consecrate to me. Consecrate to me is coming to include anything that's consecrated. It doesn't matter, even if it doesn't have a mater, the same laws will apply. Yochel miyad. Maybe immediately. I think this means even before the offering was brought. Is that what that means? That the laws of impurity should apply? So Talmud Laimar Yikrav, it says no, only after the offering is brought will we say that the laws of impurity are going to apply to this. Amar Rabbi Lazar, we would only say that he's chayev if he ate it. Now it looks like he's going to be chayev even if he just touches it. Let's see what this means. Above, right? Oh, the Rebbe Loza is saying that the pasuk Yikrav, it says Talmud Laimar Yikrav, any man that would bring from the sacrifice. So the Rebbe Loza explains Yikrav sounds like that he's touching it. comes close. The Chayesh Negeya Shuchayev, you were only chayev if someone eats it with impurity. What does it mean? Yikrav b'huchsher basar likarav v'kasam medaber. We're talking about when the flesh would be eligible to be brought, and then if a person eats it b'tuma, when it was ready to be brought, it was already sacrificed or whatever. So then haketzad, how does this work? Yesh matirin. If it's something that has a matir, what's a matir? That means something that permits it to be eaten either for human consumption or for the mizbeach. So then mishikru matirin. Then he's only going to be chayav for impurity once the matirim are brought. Ain't like matirin. It doesn't have matirin, then there's nothing to permit it. Then mishi yiktash bekeli, once it goes into a holy vessel, that's when the loss of impurity would apply. Ashkechan Tumma. So far, what we just learned here is that Tumma applies even to those things that don't have a mater. For example, the kaimetz, the scoop of a mincha, or maybe ketairas or something, or what did we do yesterday? No, what did we say yesterday regarding what? Now we're saying that
if it has the permitter, you have to pay. It's the same exact thing. Like if there's no permitter, immediately it sounds like
no. Yesterday we were learning that if there's no permitter, then we don't say the laws of pigel, right? Now we're learning the laws of kudshim. Not laws of tumma, the impurity. Laws of impurity will apply to something that doesn't have a permitter. So when does it apply? Once it's put into the vessel. It doesn't have a permitter for that time to take place. It's just the placing it in the vessel. So ashkechan tumma. So far we have something that doesn't have a permitter. We have the impurity by it. However, nicer minalan. How do we know something that doesn't have a permitter? It has the laws of nicer. That it's nicer means that it's left over. Iber geblibena. So we learn. The Gemara says, "Asi chil chil mitama." We can learn it with a verbal analogy from the word chilul, which we had from tuma. Trying to figure out what I wrote 7 years ago. I used this Gemara, but I don't know what I'm talking about. Okay. Leilef, let us learn avoin mipigol. Maybe, you see, if we learn from Tumma, then it's going to come out that the laws will apply to things that don't have a mater. If we learn from pigol, then it's going to come out that it doesn't apply if there's no mater. Because pigol has a limitation. It only works if the thing has a mater. So why are we learning chil mituma? Maybe we should learn avoin mipigol. Where it says mistabra mituma havli lamela. We probably should be learning from Tumma as opposed to Pigel because Shekain Gozel Siman. Because there's three things that are similar between Tumma and Nicer. One is Psula Guf. The Pigel, you see, Tumma and Nicer is that the item itself becomes invalid. Pigol, on the other hand, it only becomes invalid because of his thoughts. It's not an actual contact thing. Nicer is that it's actually left over after the allotted time. Tumma is actually something came in contact, as opposed to Pigol, which is all in thought. It's all a thought experiment. Okay. The next thing is the Zayin is the sprinkling of the blood makes it puzzle. So Pigol, you see, when it comes to Nicer, it wasn't the sprinkling of the blood that invalidated it. The sprinkling of the blood has nothing to do with the Nicer. I mean, yeah, the blood had to be sprinkled, but the nicer is because it was 2 days later and it still wasn't eaten. That's what invalidates it. And with tumah, it doesn't have to do with the sprinkling of the blood. It has to do with it came in contact with tumah, or the person came in contact with tumah and then he ate it. So, and what's the lamed? And then the chilul. Chilul is the lamed. It says the word chilul, but pigul is different. The Gemara says adarabba. You're saying that they're so similar. These two things are similar because of the tumah and nicer are similar. But adara, on the contrary, pigul avalei l'melach. It's more similar. Nicer is more similar to pigul. Shekain nicer. Because they have the concept of nicer. Well, nicer is nicer. Actually, the correct version is supposed to be shkein huter. Both of them are never become permitted just because it's a community, as opposed to tumah. We're looking at comparisons that are in contrast to tumah now. So instead of nicer, it's supposed to be hutar. Both of them do not become permitted if the entire community is involved in it, as opposed to tumah, which it does become permitted. Tzitz, both of them, both here, pigul and nicer, the tzitz doesn't atone for it. In tahar, both of them are pure. Nicer is pure, and pigul is pure, as opposed to tumah, which is impure. And bisman, both of them have to do with time. Pigul and nicer are very similar. The pigul is when he thinks that he's going to eat it out of a lot of time, and nicer when it's actually eating it out of a lot of time. That's a good comparison. And karav, and both of them are psul in the karban as opposed to psul in the person. And these are more comparisons than nicer is to tumah. Nicer is more similar to pigul. Ella, rather, so the Gemara says, Midatani Levi, it's something that Levi taught. Levi was a student of Rebbe. The Tani Levi, when it came to impurity, says, Levi taught, Minayin shaf psul zman. How do you know that even if it became pasul because it was left too long, akasim medarba, that the pasuk is talking about when it says that you should separate from the holies of the Jewish people, the impurity, even you should separate when it's even when it's, you should keep your you should be careful with impurity even if something was left over too long. Should not profane my holy name, but they consecrate to me. Tells me we're talking about two types of something profane. One is if it's left over, and the other one is if it becomes impure. So it's talking about anything that's consecrated. What we were trying to gain from here is that does it only apply to things that laws of nicer only apply to things that have a mater? And we're saying no, because the pasuk says b'shnei chilulim. It comes out that two types of chilul, whether it's nicer or whether it's tumah, and that applies to everything. So therefore, by the nicer also, it's going to apply to everything, even if there's no mater. Okay, let's leave it over here. Have a good Shabbos.
Thank you.
And Daf Mem Vav.
I mean, let's say that you're coming from far away and you get held up by the security guard at the Wallach Temple.
Because yellow oxygen masks drop from the compartment above your seat, you would just need.
Thank you. Have a good Shabbos.
Oh, have a good Shabbos. We're hearing all the instructions from the. Put on your mask first, and
You're coming over.
yeah, you'll be here. Shabbos.
Have a safe flight.
Yeah, have a safe flight. Everything should be good.
What's with your note from 7 years ago that you can't do a Kal V'chomer backwards, right? Look it up. You can't remember Dr. Stein asked the question. You can't make a Kal V'chomer, a Chomer from the Kal. Or
Right.
whatever. What's their note?
It's a commitment.
I had some things underlined here, and I wrote something about achila. And the pasuk says, "Asher yikrav mikol zerachem el hakadashim."
Oh,
I wrote achila. Not sure what I'm referring to.
this comes after.
Oh, instead of I know what I was talking about. The yikrav, the Gemara says, are we really talking about someone that's tummy that comes close that should be chayav just for touching? The yikrav, the Gemara learns as achila instead of negiah, not touching it. Anyway, okay.
Shkoyach.
Okay, have a good Shabbos.